Some advice changes what you do. Other advice changes how you see what you've already done. In 1947, 2 years after the bombs fell, I sat across from Einstein in Princeton. I expected judgment. What I received instead was a question so simple it dismantled the entire framework of guilt I'd been carrying. He didn't tell me I was wrong to build the weapon. He didn't tell me I was right. He asked me why I believed the decision had ever been mine to make. That question, spoken quietly in his cluttered office, redirected every conversation I would have about Los Alamos for the next 20 years. It didn't absolve me. It clarified where responsibility actually lived, not in the physics, but in the systems that decide how physics gets used.
Before we continue, take a moment to notice where you're listening from, and if this story stays with you, you're welcome to return tomorrow for what comes next.
The note arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Einstein's handwriting, unmistakable, even on the small cream-colored card. Robert, would you have time for tea this week? There is something I would like to discuss. A. Nothing more. I held it in my hand longer than necessary, feeling the weight of what those few words might mean. I had been avoiding him. Not deliberately, but not accidentally either. Princeton was small enough that avoidance required some effort, and I had been making that effort for months. We passed each other occasionally on campus, exchanged brief greetings, but I had not sought his company. I told myself it was because I was busy. The Institute for Advanced Study kept me occupied with administrative matters, with correspondence, with the endless work of trying to build something useful from the wreckage of what we had accomplished. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. I did not want to see disappointment in his eyes. Einstein had signed the letter to Roosevelt in 1939. That letter, drafted by Szilard, but carrying Einstein's signature, had set everything in motion. It warned that Germany might build an atomic bomb. It urged the United States to begin its own research. Without that letter, there might have been no Manhattan Project, no Los Alamos, no Trinity, no Hiroshima. Einstein's name had opened the door I had walked through. But Einstein himself had not walked through it. He had been kept away from the weapons work, deemed a security risk by military intelligence. While I spent 3 years in the New Mexico desert building the device his theories had made possible, Einstein remained in Princeton, working on other problems, removed from the practical application of what he had helped predict. By the time the bombs fell in August 1945, he had publicly stated his regret about the letter. He had called it the greatest mistake of his life. I did not know what to say to that. What could I say? I had not signed a letter. I had built the thing itself. The years since Trinity had been strange. I had expected many things after the war ended. I had expected relief, perhaps. I had expected recognition, certainly. I had expected to return to physics, to the theoretical work I loved, to problems that existed purely in mathematics and imagination. What I had not expected was the guilt. It was not a simple guilt. It would have been easier if it were. I did not regret the work itself. I did not believe we had been wrong to build the weapon. Germany had been developing its own atomic program. Japan had shown no sign of surrender. The invasion of the Japanese home islands would have cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, perhaps millions of Japanese lives. The bomb had ended the war. These facts remained facts, regardless of how I felt about them. But the feeling persisted anyway. It lived somewhere beneath rational argument, in the place where images resided instead of logic. I saw the photographs from Hiroshima. I read the reports. I knew the numbers. 70,000 dead in the initial blast. Another 70,000 in the months that followed. Nagasaki, 3 days later. 40,000 more. The numbers were abstractions until you tried to picture them as individuals. Each one a life. Each one a story that had ended in fire and radiation. I had become, in those 2 years, a kind of public figure. People wanted to hear from me. Congressional committees, military briefings, university lectures. They wanted to know about the bomb, about its power, about what it meant for the future. Some wanted reassurance. Some wanted condemnation. All of them wanted certainty, and I had none to give. What I had instead was a growing sense that I was answering the wrong questions. Everyone wanted to know if we should have built it. Everyone wanted to know if using it had been right or wrong. Everyone wanted moral judgment on decisions that had already been made, on events that had already occurred. But these questions assumed something I was no longer certain was true. They assumed that the decision had been ours to make. I thought about this often in those months. I thought about the sequence of events that had led from Einstein's letter to the desert test at Alamogordo. Each step had seemed necessary at the time. Each step had followed logically from the one before. Roosevelt had approved initial research. The research had shown the bomb was possible. Pearl Harbor had made it urgent. The Army had taken over. General Groves had been appointed. Los Alamos had been built. Scientists had been recruited. I had agreed to lead them. At what point in that sequence had there been a choice? At what point could someone have said no and made it stick? Roosevelt could have ignored Einstein's letter. But with Germany at war and atomic physics advancing rapidly, what responsible president would have taken that risk? The scientists could have refused to participate. But with Germany building its own bomb, what responsible physicist would have sat idle? I could have declined Groves' offer to lead the laboratory. But with the project already underway and the need for technical leadership clear, what responsible scientist would have walked away? Each decision had been constrained by the decisions before it, by the circumstances surrounding it, by the knowledge available at the time. We had not been free agents choosing our path. We had been components in a larger system, a system that had its own momentum, its own logic, its own direction. This was what troubled me most. Not that we had built the bomb, but that it seemed we could not have done otherwise. Not that we had used it, but that once it existed, its use had become almost inevitable. The weapon had not been the result of individual moral choices. It had been the result of a process, a system, a way of organizing human effort toward a specific end. And if that were true, if the bomb had been a product of systems rather than choices, then what did my guilt mean? What was I guilty of? Exactly. Following the logic of physics? Accepting the job I was offered? Doing the work competently? These were not crimes. These were not even moral failures. These were simply what anyone in my position would have done. But the guilt remained. It sat in my chest like a weight, heaviest in the early morning hours when sleep would not come. It flavored every conversation about the bomb, every lecture, every interview. It made me irritable with people who offered easy answers, whether those answers condemned or justified what we had done. I had spoken with colleagues about this. Rabi, Bethe, Teller, others who had been at Los Alamos. Their responses varied. Some felt no guilt at all. Some felt it keenly. None of them had resolved it in a way that satisfied me. The religious among them spoke of sin and redemption. The political among them spoke of necessity and consequences. But none of these frameworks fit what I was feeling. What I was feeling was more fundamental. It was a sense that I had participated in something larger than myself, something I had not fully controlled, and that this participation had changed the world in ways that could not be undone. I had been the director of Los Alamos. I had organized the work. I had solved technical problems. I had stood in the desert that morning in July and watched the first atomic explosion light the sky. I had said afterward that I was reminded of the line from the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. But had I? Or had I simply been the instrument through which a historical process had expressed itself? Was I death, or was I merely the hand that death had used? This was the question I had been living with for 2 years. This was the question I had not been able to answer, and this was why, when Einstein's note arrived asking me to tea, I felt both relief and dread. Relief, because perhaps he would understand. Dread, because perhaps he would not. I wrote back the same day. Thursday afternoon, if that suits you. R. His reply came the next morning. Thursday at 3, my office at the Institute A. I had 4 days to prepare. I spent them not preparing at all. Thursday arrived cold and clear. I walked to Einstein's office through the Institute grounds, past the bare trees and brown grass of early spring. The building was quiet. Most people had already left for the day. I climbed the stairs slowly, aware that I was delaying. His door was open. He sat at his desk, surrounded by papers, chalkboards covered in equations, books stacked in precarious towers. The office looked exactly as it always did, a kind of organized chaos that reflected how his mind worked. He looked up when I knocked, and his face broke into that familiar smile, warm and slightly mischievous. Robert, come in, come in. I have made tea, but I warn you, it is terrible. I have never learned to make it properly. The ordinariness of the greeting caught me off guard. I had built this meeting into something significant in my mind, weighted it with expectation and anxiety. But Einstein was simply offering bad tea and gesturing to a chair. I sat. He poured 2 cups from a battered pot, handed me one,
and settled back into his own chair with a sigh. For a moment we sat in silence, drinking tea that was indeed terrible, too weak and faintly metallic. Outside, a bird called. Papers rustled in a draft from the window. "You have been avoiding me," he said finally. "Not accusatory, just observational. A statement of fact." Yes, I thought so. I wondered why. I set down my cup. There seemed no point in evasion. I did not know what you would say to me about the bomb. He nodded slowly, his eyes on his tea. "And what did you imagine I would say?" "That I should not have built it. That it was wrong. That I had betrayed something important. Physics, humanity, both." Einstein was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "And do you believe you betrayed these things?" "I don't know. I think about it constantly. I cannot determine the answer. Because you are asking the wrong question." I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He set down his own cup and leaned forward slightly. "You are asking whether building the bomb was right or wrong. This is the question everyone asks. The newspapers, the politicians, the priests. They all want to know. Was it moral? Was it justified? Was it necessary? Yes? Yes. But this question assumes something that I do not believe is true. What does it assume? That you chose to build it." The words hung in the air between us. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of tension I had not known I was holding. "I did choose," I said. "Groves offered me the position. I accepted." "Did you?" Einstein's eyes were sharp now, focused. "Or did the situation choose you? Tell me, Robert. When Groves came to you in 1942, when he asked you to lead this laboratory, what would have happened if you had said no?" I thought about it. Someone else would have led it, probably Lawrence or Compton, and the bomb would have been built anyway. Yes, almost certainly. And if Roosevelt had ignored my letter in 1939, if he had decided not to pursue atomic research, Germany was already working on it. If they had succeeded first, the consequences would have been catastrophic, Einstein finished. So Roosevelt could not ignore the letter. And once the research began, once it showed the bomb was possible, the military had to take over. And once the military controlled it, the bomb had to be built. And once it was built, it had to be tested. And once it was tested, it had to be used. Each step forced the next step. Yes, that's how it felt. Yes. Then tell me. He leaned back, his hands folded in his lap. At which point in this sequence did you make a free choice? At which point could you have changed the outcome? I opened my mouth to answer and found I could not. I ran through the sequence again in my mind. Each decision had been constrained by circumstances, by information, by the logic of the situation. At no point had I stood in a position of true freedom, able to choose one path or another without enormous external pressure determining the choice. I see you understand, Einstein said quietly, but I still made choices. I still did the work. Of course you did. I am not saying you had no agency. I am saying your agency was not what you think it was. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You are treating yourself as if you were a king, Robert, as if you had stood alone on a mountain and decided the fate of nations. But you were not a king. You were a scientist working within a system that had its own goals, its own momentum, its own logic. The question is not whether you should have stopped that system. The question is whether you could have. Others refused. Rotblat left Los Alamos before the bomb was finished. He saw what it would mean. Yes. And did his leaving stop anything? No. Did it even slow the work? Not measurably. Einstein spread his hands. Then what was the nature of his choice? He maintained his personal moral purity, perhaps. This is valuable to him, and I do not diminish it. But he did not change the outcome. The bomb was built. The bomb was used. His refusal was a gesture, not a force. I felt something like anger rising. So you are saying nothing we did mattered? That we were all just following a script? No. His voice was firm now. I am saying that what mattered was not the individual moral choices of individual scientists. What mattered was the existence of the system itself. A system that takes scientific knowledge and converts it into military power. A system that takes curious men like us and turns us into builders of weapons. That system existed before Los Alamos. It exists now. It will exist tomorrow. And until we understand that system, until we confront its nature and its power, we will keep asking the wrong questions about guilt and responsibility. I stared at him. Something in what he was saying resonated with the confusion I had been feeling, the sense that all the moral arguments about the bomb were somehow missing the point. You are telling me I should not feel guilty? No! Einstein shook his head. I am telling you that your guilt by itself means nothing. Guilt is a personal feeling. It makes you feel bad. It makes you lose sleep. But it does not change anything. It does not prevent the next bomb. It does not alter the system that created this one. Then what should I do with it? Convert it into something useful. He leaned forward again. You feel guilty because you participated in building a weapon that killed many thousands of people. This is a reasonable feeling. But if you stop there, if you simply carry that guilt as a burden, you waste it. The question is not whether you should have built the bomb. The question is what you will do now that it exists. What will you say about it? How will you use your position, your knowledge, your public voice?
How will you help people understand not just what the bomb is, but what it means about the way we organize our scientific and military institutions?
I sat back, feeling something I had not felt in months. Not relief exactly, not absolution, but clarity. A sense that there was a path forward, a way to think about what had happened that was neither self-justification nor self-flagellation. I had been giving speeches, I said, about international control, about the need for openness in atomic research. I know. I have read them, and they are good. They are necessary. But I think you have not yet said what you really understand. You are still speaking as if the problem is technical. As if better policies, better agreements, better international organizations will solve it. But the problem is not technical, Robert. The problem is that we have built a system that turns science into weapons automatically, without thought, without choice. Until we confront that system itself, until we ask why it exists and how it might be changed, we are simply rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. I looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light slanted through his window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. You have been thinking about this for a while, I said. Since 1939, he replied. Since I signed that letter, I made a mistake, Robert. Not in the physics. The physics was correct. But in believing that warning Roosevelt was enough, that pointing out the danger was sufficient, I did not understand then what I understand now. What do you understand now? That the letter did not create the Manhattan Project. The system did. The letter was simply an excuse the system used to do what it was already going to do. And until we change the system, until we change how science and military power interact, there will be more letters, more projects, more bombs. Your guilt and my guilt will not stop that. Only understanding might. The room was quiet. I picked up my tea, found it cold, set it down again. I don't know if I can do what you're suggesting, I said finally. I don't know if anyone can change a system that large, that entrenched. Einstein smiled, that same warm, slightly sad smile. Neither do I, but I know that carrying guilt without purpose is a waste of a good conscience. Better to use it for something, even if that something is difficult, even if it fails. I nodded slowly. It was not the conversation I had expected. It was better and worse and more honest than I had imagined. It had not absolved me. It had not told me I was right or wrong. It had simply shifted the ground beneath the question, shown me that I had been standing in the wrong place all along. Thank you, I said, for terrible tea and uncomfortable truths. Yes, he laughed, and for a moment the weight in the room lifted. Then his face grew serious again. Robert, one more thing. Yes? When you speak about the bomb in the future, when people ask you about responsibility and guilt, do not let them make it about you personally. Do not accept the role of tragic hero or repentant villain. These are both forms of self-importance. What happened at Los Alamos was not a personal moral drama. It was a historical process. Help people understand that process. That is where your responsibility lies now. I stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. You asked me why I believed the decision had ever been mine to make. I don't have an answer yet. Good, Einstein said. When you find one, come tell me. We will have tea again, and I promise it will be just as bad. I left his office as the sun was setting, walking back through the Institute grounds with my hands in my pockets, thinking about systems and choices, about guilt and responsibility, about what it meant to be a scientist in a world that had learned to weaponize knowledge itself. The conversation with Einstein changed how I spoke, but it did not immediately change how I felt. That transformation took longer, and it was not comfortable. In the weeks that followed, I found myself testing his framework against my experience. I went back through my memories of Los Alamos, examining each decision I had made, each moment where I thought I had been exercising choice. Einstein's question followed me everywhere. At which point could I have changed the outcome? The answer, when I was honest with myself, was never, or almost never. There had been small choices, certainly. Technical decisions about weapon design, administrative choices about how to organize the laboratory, personnel decisions about who should work on which problems. But the fundamental trajectory, the path from Roosevelt's approval to the bombs falling on Japan, had been fixed by forces larger than any individual involved. This realization did not bring peace. It brought a different kind of discomfort. I had spent 2 years constructing a narrative of personal responsibility. In that narrative, I was the central figure, the man who had built the bomb, whose decisions and actions had made the difference. It was a heavy narrative, full of guilt and doubt, but it had a certain coherence. It made sense of my role. It gave meaning to my suffering. Einstein's framework dismantled that narrative. In his view, I was not a central figure, but a component, not a decision maker, but a participant in a process that had its own logic and momentum. This was simultaneously liberating and diminishing. It suggested that my guilt was misplaced, but it also suggested that my agency had been far more limited than I had believed. I did not like feeling powerless. No one does. And there was something about Einstein's analysis that made me feel precisely that. If the system determined outcomes, if individual choices mattered so little, then what was the point of moral deliberation at all? Why agonize over decisions if those decisions were essentially predetermined by circumstance? I raised this objection when I saw him again, a few weeks later. We had fallen into a pattern of occasional meetings, usually in the late afternoon, always with bad tea and long silences between exchanges. You make it sound as if we are helpless, I said, as if nothing we do matters. Einstein frowned. That is not what I said, but it's the implication. If the system determines everything, if our choices are constrained to the point of irrelevance, then we might as well not bother making choices at all. No, he shook his head firmly. You are confusing two different things. Individual choices within a system have limited power to change the system's fundamental trajectory. This is true. But individual choices still matter enormously for how that trajectory unfolds, what costs it imposes, who suffers, and who benefits. I don't see the difference. Then let me be more clear. He set down his teacup. You could not have stopped the Manhattan Project. This is what I am saying. The forces driving it, the war, the German atomic program, the military-industrial infrastructure, the political pressures, these were too large for any individual to deflect. But within that project, you made hundreds of choices that mattered. How to treat your scientists, whether to push for safety measures, how to think about the weapon's use, what to say afterward. These choices did not change whether the bomb was built, but they changed what the bomb meant, how it was understood, what happened next. I thought about this. So you're saying we have limited agency, but that limited agency still matters? Yes. And I am saying that understanding the limits is important, because if you think you have more power than you do, you will blame yourself for things you could not have prevented. And if you think you have less power than you do, you will fail to use the power you actually have. This distinction was subtle, but I felt its weight. I had been doing exactly what he described, alternating between grandiose self-blame and helpless fatalism. Neither position was accurate. Neither was useful. What power do I actually have? I asked. Your voice, your position, your knowledge. Einstein leaned back. You are Robert Oppenheimer, director of Los Alamos, father of the atomic bomb. When you speak about nuclear weapons, people listen. When you describe the dangers, they pay attention. When you advocate for international control, your words carry weight. This is real power. Not the power to have stopped the bomb, but the power to shape what comes next. I have been using that power. I have given speeches, written articles, testified before Congress. I know. And you have said important things. But I think you have not yet said the most important thing, which is that the problem is not the bomb itself. The problem is a way of organizing society that makes bombs inevitable. He paused, letting this settle. You keep talking about international control, about preventing proliferation, about managing the atom. These are necessary goals, but they treat the symptom, not the disease. The disease is a system that automatically converts scientific discovery into military power. Until we acknowledge that system, Until we begin to question whether it should exist at all, we are simply postponing the next catastrophe. I felt resistance rising. You are asking me to advocate for something radical, something that would require completely restructuring how science and government interact. Yes, that's impossible. No one would listen. Even if they did, they would never implement it. Einstein smiled sadly. Probably true. But is that a reason not to say it? I did not answer immediately. The question cut to something I had been avoiding, a fear I had not named. The fear was this, that speaking too radically, too honestly, would cost me the influence I had. That if I said what Einstein was asking me to say, I would be dismissed as naive, impractical, politically unsophisticated, that I would lose my place at the table where decisions were made. You are worried about your position, Einstein said, reading my silence. Yes, understandable. You want to remain effective. You want to be taken seriously by the people who make policy. Exactly. But Robert, think carefully. What good is a seat at that table if the table itself is the problem? The words landed hard. I felt them physically, a tightness in my chest. You are asking me to sacrifice practical influence for moral clarity. I'm asking you to recognize that practical influence within a broken system may not be influence at all. It may be complicity. He held up a hand before I could object. I know this is harsh. I know it sounds uncompromising. But consider, you have spent 2 years working within the system, advising the government, proposing policies, trying to guide nuclear development in safer directions. Has it worked? I thought about the General Advisory Committee meetings, the conversations with military officials, the testimony before Congress. I thought about what had changed and what had not. The bomb program was expanding. More weapons were being built. The Soviet Union was developing its own bomb. International control seemed further away than ever. Not well, I admitted, because the system does not want to be controlled. It wants to grow. It wants to build more bombs, better bombs, bigger bombs. This is its nature. And you, by working within it, by offering technical advice that makes it more efficient, are helping it do what it wants to do. That's not fair. I have consistently advocated for restraint, for international oversight, for limitations. I know. And these are good things, but they are good things within a bad framework. And sometimes, Robert, working within a bad framework is worse than refusing to participate at all. Because it legitimizes the framework. It suggests that the problem can be solved through minor adjustments rather than fundamental change. I felt angry now, genuinely angry. So what would you have me do? Resign? Give up any chance to influence policy? Make grand speeches about dismantling the military-industrial complex and then retire to obscurity? Einstein did not rise to my anger. His voice remained calm. I would have you tell the truth, the full truth, not the politically acceptable version. I would have you say that the bomb was not a triumph of science, but a failure of civilization. I would have you say that as long as we organize society around military competition between nations, there will be more bombs, more weapons, more ways to destroy ourselves. I would have you say that the choice before us is not how to manage nuclear weapons, but whether to continue living in a world where such weapons are inevitable. And if saying these things costs me my influence, then you will learn what your influence was worth. We sat in silence. The room had grown dark. Neither of us moved to turn on a light. You are being unfair to me, I said finally. Perhaps. But unfairness is sometimes necessary. You are an intelligent man, Robert. You understand these things already. But you are holding back, compromising, trying to remain respectable in the eyes of people who will never truly respect you because you helped create something that terrifies them. Better, I think, to accept that you are already compromised, already marked by what you did, and to use that mark for something honest. Martyrdom is not appealing to me. I'm not asking for martyrdom. I am asking for honesty. And I'm suggesting that your current path, the path of careful compromise and measured statements, is not protecting you from anything. You already carry the weight of Los Alamos. Speaking honestly about it cannot make that weight heavier. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the evening was settling over Princeton, lights coming on in buildings, people walking home. The ordinary life of a university town, untouched by the conversations happening in this small office. You are asking me to give up hope that the system can be reformed, I said. No. I am asking you to be honest about how difficult that reform will be, and to recognize that reform cannot happen if if we refuse to acknowledge what needs reforming. I turned back to face him. And what about your own advice? What are you doing to change this system? Einstein nodded, as if he had been expecting this. Very little. I write letters. I sign petitions. I speak to groups like the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists. But I am old, Robert, and I was never part of the weapons program. My voice carries less weight than yours on these matters. I am not asking you to do something I have done successfully. I am asking you to do something I wish I had done more courageously when I had the chance. Which is to say clearly that the system itself is wrong. Not just this weapon or that policy, but the entire structure that makes weapons inevitable. To say it knowing that people will call you naive, impractical, even dangerous. To say it anyway. I returned to my chair. My anger had faded, replaced by something more complex. Not agreement, exactly, but recognition. Recognition that Einstein was identifying something I had been avoiding, a choice I had been refusing to make. I will think about what you have said, I told him. That is all I ask. But we both knew it was not. He was asking for more than thought. He was asking for a kind of courage I was not sure I possessed. The courage to speak honestly in a world that demanded compromise.
The courage to risk influence for integrity. The courage to accept that I might be more useful as an honest voice in the wilderness than as a careful advisor at the table.
I left his office that evening, uncertain and troubled. The conversation had not resolved anything. If anything, it had made my situation more difficult, more complicated. Einstein had not offered comfort. He had offered challenge, and I was not ready to accept that challenge, not yet. But I could feel it working on me, this question he had posed. Could feel it shifting how I thought about my responsibilities, my position, my future. The advice he had given was not simple or clear. It did not tell me what to do. It told me what to think about, what to examine, what to question. And that, I was beginning to understand, was exactly the kind of advice I needed. Not answers, but better questions.